everybody, Alisa Marie here. Hi, my sweet lifers. Today I'm with Father Andrew again, hanging out. We're doing our Sweet Life in Christ, working on those disciples, and today we're talking about James and John.
Yes, yeah.
Yep.
So, I wanted to talk about both of them. Andrew and Peter were brothers, but James and John, they're also brothers, but they're so connected. They are connected in the Scripture together. But it's because they're so close to Jesus, both of them. I mean, of course, Peter was one of the inner disciples, and Andrew was really close to Jesus. But these two always seem to be hand in hand. In fact, they have the nickname Sons of Thunder because of their attitudes, their fiery go-getter attitudes. I want to just talk about both of them. Yeah. And they both did their different things after the ascension, but that we could talk about. But really, a lot of them, their story goes hand in hand, and we can see a lot of ourselves in the stories of James and John. So James and John, they're in the Scriptures. They're known as the sons of Zebedee. That's an important point because it was with their dad Zebedee that they were called by Jesus.
Right.
Of course, just like Peter and Andrew, they too were fishermen. They were in their boats, but this time they were with their dad Zebedee in their boat doing their
family business.
And this was a family business with their dad. Peter and Andrew, we don't get the sense that they're with their dad. However, in those times, it's usually a family business. I mean, carpenter. Jesus was a carpenter's son. They thought that's what he was going to do, but he went on to be. He went on to fill in as Messiah. But that's what they did. But we get more intimate moment. I mean, it's more powerful when we see this calling story with their parents. Again, Jesus, in the Scriptures, Jesus talked about how families will be ripped apart. Mm-hmm. And that's in the early days when following Christ often resulted, especially in that first, the first disciples, the early church. When you followed Christ, you're shunned, you're outcast. And oftentimes it ripped families apart. And in this situation, not necessarily ripped it apart, but it showed the cost of following Jesus. Jesus told us to pick up our cross and follow him. Don't let anything hold you back.
Right.
So he came up to James and John, saw them in the boat, and again, just like Peter and Andrew, went up to him and said, "Follow me, I'll make you fishers of men." They dropped their nets. And it even says in the Scripture, they immediately dropped their nets and left their dad. That is a powerful image of, and one that, again, I want to go back. I want to imagine we're sitting with our parents or whatever as younger people and enjoying our parents, and someone's saying, "Hey, you're going to follow me, but you're going to have to leave them." I'm thinking, I have to think about that. We have to think, because that's a hard choice. Luckily nowadays we not have to, most families, we grow up Christian, and eventually that the whole families became part of Christ. But that time, it's, if you follow Jesus, that's it. That's your family. And if your other family is going to hold you back, you leave them. Right. And that's what James and John did. They left their dad behind, and they went and followed Jesus. James and John essentially became part of Jesus' close knit group. He had a few disciples, James, John, Peter, who were in his inner circle. Mary Magdalene was one of those,
right?
Who was in his inner circle, and in fact, it was only those who went up not Mary Magdalene, but the disciples, this close knit group, who Jesus took to the mountaintop to see the transfiguration of Jesus, where his clothes became dazzling white, his face shone, and Elijah and Moses appeared next to him, and James and John were there. They were brought. So Jesus truly was close to them. In the Gospel of John is referred to as the disciple whom Jesus loved. We can tell that he was one of the disciples who Jesus truly loved. And we'll talk a little bit about how we see that in the Scriptures when we really focus on them individually, but they were close to Jesus. They went to the transfiguration. They had a couple. They went with him to pray. They were close to Jesus. However, their humanity still took over. Just because they're close to Jesus, they still had human qualities. They weren't perfect people. Just like Peter wasn't a perfect person, just like any of the disciples. Matthew was a tax collector, and he still was called.
Absolutely.
They weren't perfect people. They're referred, as mentioned, they're referred to as the sons of thunder. And you brought up before we're recording, asking, isn't James the one who lost his temper And yes, James lost his temper. He thought, and that's some people think that's why he was the first to be martyred because of his fiery temper. But he wanted Jesus to rain fire on a Samaritan town, I believe. If I'm getting that wrong, please ignore that. I'm pretty sure that sounds. Yeah, that's the Samaritan town, and Jesus rebuked him. So, and it gets me thinking, there's so many times I'm thinking, God, will you just deal with these people? I mean, I'm watching the news, and, there's so many times I'm thinking, God, deal with these people, smite them, but that's not how God works.
No.
That's not how God works. And he still let that raw emotion get the better of him. And again, just like Peter, when he denied Jesus, just like when he didn't get it, Jesus still called James to follow him. And that, they did. Another example of them letting their human emotions get the best of them is when they asked, they're in Jesus' inner circle. They knew that Jesus truly loved them, but then that led them to ask. In some traditions, some cases, it was their mother who asked, "Hey, I want these two to sit on your right hand when you get into your right and left hand, either side of you when you get into your kingdom." So essentially, they put themselves on this pedestal with Jesus, and all the disciples will. They recognize, well, Jesus truly likes us, so obviously we matter more than these little guys down here. And Jesus again rebuked him. Notice how many times Jesus rebukes the apostles, but he never kicks them out. And sometimes sometimes we think we deserve more.
Well, but it's like parenting children.
Exactly, yeah.
If you think about that, I mean, that's the way I've always thought about that, is that Jesus was calling specific people he knew who were supposed to be a part of his group. Yeah. Specifically from him knowing what they could do and would do going forward, and they did not know what that was, but he knew. He knew. Which is great because it's that seed that he plants in all of us. Yeah. And we don't know what we are able to do. And then we look back and we are able to realize what we've been given. Yeah. And if we use it right, what we've been able to do.
And it doesn't mean one's more important than the other. We all have our different...
What children do. Children are always like that. They're very competitive. And they're very like little cliquey, and I'm just better, and this da-da-da-da-dee, and whatever. And like a mother and a father know children. Yeah. You are not better than anyone else. Yeah. We're all equal. Yeah. That's not how this works. Yeah. I don't love you more than you. Yeah. You're not going to get to be more special than you. Exactly. Stop doing all of that nonsense. Yeah. That's a distraction. Yeah. Just know that you've been called.
Yeah. And that's how Jesus said, first of all asked, are you able to share the cup I share? And they said yes, but guess what? So is everybody else there. Everybody else shared the cup. And so he pointed out, you all are equal. Yes, you're going to do great things. You're going to do great, but no more so than these others. Right. And like you mentioned, children, I'm sometimes asked by my kids, who do you like better? Or who's your favorite? Oh, you don't like me as much as them. And it's like, no, you all are equal. You all are my favorite. And that's how Jesus, that's what he did. But yeah, they wanted this. They had this idea that I got to go up to the mountain. I got to do this. I was the first called. And it's kind of funny that in some traditions it was their mother who went up and said, "Hey, Jesus, I want you to treat my children better." Which, my son's playing football this year, and one of the first things the coach said was to the parents, we have rules. There's a creed for the players, there's a creed for the parents, there's a creed for the coaches. And one of the creeds for the parents was, if your kid's not getting enough playing time, don't talk to us today. We can talk to us later, but we all want to see our kids in special positions. We all want to see them excel. We all want to see them. We all want what's best for our children. And in that moment, she thought what's best for her kids. After all, they left their father to follow Jesus. She wanted to make sure they were being taken care of. So, in a way, I don't fault her. No. I don't fault them. They want to know I'm getting all that I can. But at the end of the day, their humanity and this desire to be treated well put themselves over others and elevating others when we all are co-equal in God. Right. Just like all the disciples were co-equal. They're first among last. Uh-huh. So again, we can see ourselves in they were fiery. They had a little bit of a temper. They sometimes thought that Jesus should have. James thought that they should have smited a group of people, or they thought that they're I want to be elevated to a higher status. Jesus brought them down. And sometimes we find ourselves doing that. And we just need to be brought back down by Jesus and by God and say, hey, hold up.
Yeah.
I got a plan.
Slow down.
Yeah, slow your roll.
Yeah.
And it's not just Peter who steps in, who puts his foot in his mouth all the time. It's all of them, including James and John, some of the greatest disciples that we know of, and one of whom has given us a whole lot of works out, in the New Testament outside of Paul.
So John, we were talking about that earlier too. So John has been written about after his death by. So we've got all this wonderful stuff about John. So, John just didn't. I guess John wasn't a writer. Maybe John decided he didn't need to do all that. He was too busy, and somebody could just. He wrote to someone, and then they wrote for the actual. Yeah.
So that's what we think of the gospel. So John has 4 books in the New Testament attributed to him: the Gospel of John, 3 letters of John, and the Revelation. Or is it 2 letters of John? Oh my goodness! So the letters of John and Revelation.
Right.
Now, the letters of John, they were written by John to a group of people who were, just like Paul was writing to a church, to a group of people. Revelation of John is the visions that John had. And everyone, it's Revelation, and the vision, how God revealed his, the plans to him, and then the Gospel of John. Now, the Gospel and the Revelation of John, especially the Gospel. We'll start there. The Gospel of John is attributed to John. It has his name, but it was actually written after John died. Right. John was one of the only disciples who wasn't martyred. I think there are other disciples who weren't martyred, but John was one of the few who wasn't martyred, and he was also the last to pass away. He died they think around late 100s, so around 98 AD, and the Gospel of John was the last gospel written, the gospel book written, and it was after 100 AD. So it was after John died, but what we figure is this was someone who was a contemporary of John, who was told the stories by John, and wrote what John told him. Wrote the gospel of Jesus according to his contemporary. And in John, I just love the Gospel of John because the imagery is so beautiful. It's, I love the I am sayings by Jesus. I love the discourses in Jesus, or in John, and I love the opening of John where it's a theologically rich narrative. But I also love how John treats John. John, who refers to John, the writer John refers to the Apostle John as the disciple whom Jesus loved, the beloved disciple. And that's what really showed in John how close Jesus was to John, how much Jesus respected him and Peter. Though John kind of beats up on Peter a little bit, they had their disagreements, but in the end, Peter was still someone who Jesus truly loved. After all, it was in John's gospel that Jesus left the church to Peter. Mm-hmm. But John is known as the beloved disciple, and we see in John that John and James were truly, especially John, was seen as Jesus' brother. I mean, he was like a brother to Jesus. In fact, at the feet of Mary, we were talking a little bit before, it was John who Jesus said, "This is your mother, and woman, behold, this is your son." Basically, like you said before, I like that line. Take care of your mom. This is your mom. Take care of her. And so he brought him into the family. Jesus often saw his group, the disciples, as his family. Remember when Mary, his mother, and his brother and sister brothers and sisters were looking for him. They said, "Hey, Jesus, your mom and your brothers are looking for you." And he said, "Who are my mothers and brothers and sisters?" And pointed to the people who were following his disciples. These are them. But John, we get that clear sense that this is, Jesus saw them as family, and he brought them in and entrusted his own family to their care after he left.
And it was John that was with Mary at the foot of the cross.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, he was there.
He was there.
The cross, during the crucifixion.
Yeah. Yeah. And so one of the, John, like the apostles, went out and cared for the churches, cared for other churches. Ephesus is one that is highly attributed to John, the church of Ephesus. Ephesians is written to that church. And the church was planted by Paul, but John went after that, and he was with them. He was with them a lot and cared for them. In fact, his remains are believed to be interred in a cathedral or basilica in his name in there. So that's where we believe John really focused on, and in his writings as well. He focused on that. And going, again, just like the others, going out and caring for this church. I call, John was he was one of the evangelists of the group. Who wrote letters, who helped establish a gospel in his name, which is canon. The other one is Matthew. Mark and Luke were apostles of apostles and just wrote about what they heard about and what the people like Paul or Peter or others were telling them. And John, he wrote to the people. He spread the good news.
John and Matthew, are they more educated scholarly wise, and able to be able to write and have access to things that you would write with? It's interesting.
Matthew, yes, because he was a tax collector. Right. He would have. John, probably, since he was a fisherman, probably he probably, he had a man to do the same with Peter and Paul, but I'm not sure. We don't know for sure, what his level of education was or anything. But being a fisherman, that's not a skill, trade that you have to ride or people.
No, it's just interesting because it just feels like there were obviously, just as in modern times, people from all walks of life, many of them similar because of the same small space that they're in, but with access to different things, resources, because they were with different abilities to make money. Yeah. And so Matthew makes just a no-brainer. Yeah. Matthew had money. Matthew was paid by the Romans to collect the taxes. So Matthew was, he had money. Yeah. He was one of those guys that was able to make that work. So that makes sense for him. But the other guys, it's just kind of interesting that there would be maybe access or not access to it, or maybe the ability to articulate, right? To be able to articulate the experience in a way that people could understand. Yeah. And get it down on paper where it could be then saved for future generations. And which John
had. He had that ability to speak to who Jesus was. And so in that you have a witness. He was a witness. He is an evangelist. He wrote about who Jesus was. He wrote to people. But also he was a steward. His goal, yes, he didn't seem to travel as much, but he cared for a group of people. He stewarded a group of people. He stewarded the church. So here you have John, who was the beloved disciple, who was entrusted the care of Jesus' family, his mother, and the church, and he took that seriously through the end of his life, and somehow stuck it out and didn't face martyrdom. Unlike his brother, unfortunately, who did, but he cared for that church till the day he died, which he was again the last disciple to die. Now he was also, we believe, he may have been the youngest disciple out of all, which also kind of shows this idea, we want to be treated, it seems like when we're younger than everybody, it's like this young guy, he's a go-getter and all that, and that's where we saw John, who truly seemed, especially in the scriptures, was a go-getter, just like we're talking about Andrew, and so here we have a guy that took that call to steward this church, steward others, and he did that. And then and let's we can explore James. He was, on the other hand, we saw his humanity on display, yet Jesus still called him to follow him, and he did to the point of death. We go back to following. Following Jesus sometimes can be difficult. Jesus calls us to difficult places, and sometimes, especially even today in some parts of the world where falling Christian could mean you're going to be killed.
Well, and that's a point to be made. We're in the middle of our pullout of Afghanistan, and for many of you guys that are watching the channel, not to date this episode, but it's an important time in our American lives. It's an important time in our history, because so many things are from that, right? Yeah. We've had a long 20-year war in Afghanistan. Many friends of mine who are military, family history of military, and a lot of unrest in our hearts with the way that things happened and the way that one of the most important pieces of the withdrawal for me was in visiting with my friend who's special ops, was what's going to happen to the Christians. And I was like, and there we are again with that. And so I have fervently, however you say that word, fervently, hopefully that's the right word, that's the word that's come to my mind over and over again this week, prayed for them, prayed for the Christians, because I'm like, these people are, at what point do we stop? When do we learn the lesson? Like, it's like, that's my question. Like James, God, when is this going to end?
Do something now.
This is so ridiculous. Like, at some point, knock them over their heads. Make them stop this nonsense. Like, that in many ways, we see ourselves in different ways. This week especially, I felt a lot like James. Like, just fix it. Fireballs come down from the sky. Fix it. Because we don't want these Christians to be persecuted, and we know they will be. And again, where are we as a human? Where are we? We're at 2021.
And we're still just as fallen as we were back.
What happened? What lesson hasn't been learned yet? It really saddens my heart because I'm like, what has to happen for us to finally get it?
The second coming.
Well, I know that. You and I know that, but you know what I mean. It's like, that is it's like when, you have a child that you tell them to do this, and this, and then they don't do it, and then they do it again. And then if you say to yourself as a mother or father, and you have children, and I have children, and I've been a child of my parents, different siblings, different personalities, different temperaments, different things. And you're like, some of the children can be told one time, and they understand, and they trust, and that's the end of it. Some of the children, you have to tell them over and over and over and over and over and over again, and they still don't get it. They have to learn by the lessons of hard knocks. And it's just sad to me that that's where we're at still as a world. That we're having to still learn that lesson. Because it's such a simple lesson. Love one another despite our differences. We don't need to kill each other. And for their thought in my mind, I mean, like, that's something you think about happening in Bible times.
But
not now.
And that's what James faced, and John faced, and all the disciples faced this hard persecution. They had a lot of them had to worship in private. They had to worship underground, and yet they still went out there and worshipped. And in this country, we don't have to worry about that. We don't worship underground, but there are people today who have to worship underground and face persecution on a daily basis. And that's what these disciples did. They faced persecution, and that didn't stop them. There were some Christians, early Christians, who were given the opportunity to bow to Caesar. Give your sacrifice to Caesar. Go away from God and go to Caesar. And some of them did that, but most of them chose the other, and sometimes that was death. And James, that was one. And ironically, it was his fiery temper that probably got him to the sword. It was with one of the Herods who had him killed, but he didn't back down from his faith. He didn't. He knew who Jesus was. He knew Jesus was the Messiah. He was going to keep preaching that, and he wasn't going to stop. Which is probably, and again, Jesus knows who we're. This is a man with fire, and sometimes those are great preachers. Sometimes the fire burns somebody. Okay, no, but some of them are like, whoa, this guy, and that was James. He was this fiery personality, and it cost him to his death. He was the first apostle martyred. He was killed by the sword, and it was because he would not back down on his faith. He would not back down. And luckily, here in the United States, our being a prophet, our speaking the truth to the ills of the world, that's probably not going to get us killed.
No.
Most likely not. But there are some costs. I mean, we can lose we can lose friendships. Just like Jesus said, families will be ripped apart. Right. We could lose friendships over being a prophet in the world, speaking truth to the world. We can lose status. Some might think, well, there comes that wacky Christian again. Especially in a moving, more secular world. Some parts of the world where I'm wearing or some parts of the state where I wear a collar, I get, oh, that's a weirdo. Others, it's they still they still don't. But it's a conversation. Sometimes people try to avoid the guy in the collar or the people with the cross. But that shouldn't stop us from carrying our faith and living out our faith despite the costs. And we should thank God it most likely won't cost us our lives, but it might cost us something, and who cares? James didn't let that stop him.
But it hurts my heart.
It does.
As a living body of Christ, which we are both brothers and sisters in, we have people in Afghanistan this very day, 24 hours outside, a few hours of extraction, that will be persecuted because they believe in what we know to be true. Yeah. It's painful. Yeah, it is. It's painful.
It is. It's awful, and that just shows, there's still evil in this world, and again, I made the quip that it's the second coming. It really is going to be the second coming because humanity just can't stop ourselves. But we can try to put our humanity aside and love one another and do what God called us to do, and love one another, care for one another. Try to pray for our brothers and sisters across the world, or do what we can to help them. Instead of just saying, well, that sucks. What are we going to do?
Or I don't remember who it was, but somebody the other day said, well, we don't live there. And I'm like, it doesn't.
We're all on this fragile island.
It is as if you are a Jedi Knight in the Force.
Yeah, we all are.
If you've befallen any knight in the Force, it is felt throughout the universe. Yeah. And that is the way it feels to me.
And that's what Jesus reminded the disciples, James and John, when they wanted to be elevated to status. You all are in this together. You all are, and all of them were together when they went apart. Though they were apart and spreading the good news across the world, they were all linked together. Mm-hmm. And that's how we are. We are linked with our brothers and sisters all over the world, in South America, Africa, in Europe, and in Middle East, and Syria, and Afghanistan, and Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, and all these places where they are being persecuted, or in Nigeria where there's fighting on some. We are with them, and if we just ignore them, then we're breaking apart the body.
Yeah, I know.
And that's that's what James stood for. He stood that I'm going to stand up for my faith, despite any of the costs, despite what may befall me. And and just like a lot of the other disciples and a lot of the early Christians, it ended up in their martyrdom and death,
which is terrible.
Yeah,
but it is what it is.
It is.
I would rather stand up for what I believe in, than to bow to something that's not right.
Exactly, bow to the evil of the world and say, well, what can we do?
Yeah. And it's nice that we still have people doing that to this very day. Yeah,
and that's what the disciples did. They were stewards of the world, and that's what we're called to do. Yeah. And that doesn't mean we're going to go over there and fix it ourselves, because we can't. But that means being a voice, praying for, help, trying to find ways to be someone that can be a voice of change, or however that's going to look.
Yeah. So John and James, the brothers of thunder.
The sons of thunder.
Sons of thunder. So we've talked about those two guys. We've talked about Andrew, and we've talked about Peter. Yeah. And so what's up next in our next episode?
Next, I want to explore Philip and Nathaniel, or Bartholomew.
Why would they do that? It's so confusing to me. It's like Simon and Peter, Simon. Then it's like Nathaniel, and I'm like, why don't we just keep the
it's kind of confusing, and that confuses scholars. I'm like, it's Nathaniel, but I want to look at those two because they are also connected with each other, and then we'll explore the rest of them. We'll look at Jude. We'll look at Matthew and Thomas and the others, including, and then start looking at some of the women who were disciples,
Absolutely.
Mary Magdalene, Mary and Martha, and some of these women who also gave much to follow their call of
God.
God.
Thank you for doing this. I know
that
you guys are really enjoying this. I hope you are, because it's just really wonderful to really bring it down to a level where people can understand and have a conversation about these guys and gals that are, so much like us.
Yeah.
So much like us. That's just what's so cool about the Bible. It sort of seems daunting when you're little. Read your Bible. When you read it, and the words are all kind of like Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. They're not even written in English like we're used to reading and talking. But when you sit down and you actually have a conversation with someone like you, who is so knowledgeable, obviously, my priest, it makes it more real to talk about what these guys did, who they were, and how we are a lot like them. Yeah. So, anyway, I hope you guys have found some value in this. If you did, do us a favor, like and share. Don't forget to ring the bell. We'll see you soon on another Sweet Life in Christ.